One of the cooler aspects of the Kruleboyz is all of the swamp creatures they use as war beasts, and so I thought it'd be fun to broaden out how many they have. In this case, I'm doing alternate Gnashtoofs, which is the mount for their Killaboss. For the first one, I am using the Karkadrak from the Chaos Lord kit. He kind of has a bit of an arid look, but he could kind of look sort of like an iguana, I was thinking, a little bit more tropical. I started out by cutting off all of his armor plates and green stuffing in the holes that were left over. As you can see, that's actually quite a lot of him, which is foreshadowing for how much of a pain it was going to be covering them all. The Kruleboy shields with the little faces are called scare shields, I believe. I may be wrong about that. Let me know in the comments. I'm sure you all will. In this case, it's the one from the shoulder of the Killaboss. Not only had I shaved down the front of his greaves here, but also the back straps. For straps, the Kruleboyz don't use like normal leather ones. They use this kind of thin twine, and so I would add that in later with green stuff. For the shoulders, I decided to use this armor plate. It's one half of the armor plate that usually goes over the back of the neck of the Gnashtoof, but I thought it could work kind of as a samurai segmented plate. The back half of it obviously just kind of ends instead of rounding out, but I thought I could put this scare shield over it to hide it, and also just to give him a little bit more heft. One of the things about this build is that it was so much fun jigsawing on different parts of armor from the Kruleboyz that he actually ended up significantly more heavily armored than most of the Kruleboy beasts. To the back half, for example, I put this armor plate that's originally from the Gnashtoof shoulder. To fit the scare shield though, I had to carve out the arms that are on the back of the shield. That's just kind of annoying to do with clippers, but there's really no easier way to do it. I glued it over the back of the pauldrons, just hiding a little bit of it. Any other points that were being shown could just be green stuffed in later. I then checked the fit of where the Killaboss would sit. Unfortunately, he's a little too narrow for the back of the Karkadrak, but I just shaved down the inside of his legs and glued him on a little bit higher, I think, than the normal Chaos Lord sits. One of the other things I love about the Kruleboyz is the way that they have all these like hanging cloth that looks like dripping water or moss, like they just came out of the water. So I had harvested some from the Gnashtoof, some from some other kits, and I cut off the cloth that originally is hanging from him, which is cool, but not exactly Kruleboyz enough, and some of the Kruleboy culture could get in there if I just replaced it. I never really worried too much about the way that it kind of cut off at the top, because all of it could just be green stuffed over to kind of smooth down into looking like cloth. And this was actually really helpful because almost any problem could just be green stuffed over to look like it was cloth. So the way that the Gnashtoof works is that the boss is sitting on it and he's leaning backward a little bit. And so when you put him on a mount where the back falls down from it, there's like this weird gap. I had filled it with green stuff, but it didn't look good. So I decided to replace it with the upper half of a Belcher banner and kind of a back of a saddle. One of the smaller touches I really liked was I used the smaller head from the Belcher banner to kind of hang from the scare shield, and it gave him like a really good sense of just all of this armor dripping off of him and being layered on. The original Karkadrak comes on this rocky outcropping, which is cool, but I thought I could do better. I took the ruins from the Gnashtoof and put one leg over it, and then I thought it'd be cool to have the other leg with his hand kind of raised like he's creeping forward. I put the claw in here now, but then I ended up taking it off later, so you won't see it for a while, but that's eventually how I posed it. One of the other big aesthetic points of the Kruleboyz is this kind of like rotten wood that they use, and I had gotten in a new kit, so I added this little arch to replace the big Belcher banner head, and I think that works better. It's a little bit more practical, and there were a few too many scare shields on him, and like too many would start to look a little memey and not as cool. I thought for a while about putting on this banner from the original Gnashtoof, but it ended up hiding his silhouette a little bit too much, and also getting it to fall correctly was going to be a pain, so I cut it down to put it in place, but I eventually removed it later. For the shield, I like the original placement because the Gnashtoof is descending and he's got his arm raised like he's about to strike something, and it's kind of a creepy and sinister pose. But it doesn't quite work here because the Karkadrak is actually rearing up a little bit, not going downwards. So I replaced it later to have him more holding it in a upward, like sentry stance. Instead of giving him the larger scare shield that the Killaboss originally comes with, I gave him a smaller one because it kind of took up less space and distracted from the model less as a whole. I also replaced his head with the commander from the Gutrippaz kit. With one alternate mount under my belt, I decided to try it for a second. For the base of this build, I am using the Dracoth, specifically the one from Vanda's Hammerhand, the Stormcast Lord. I had already begun by cutting off the rider, and now I was very careful to cut off the armor. One of the annoying things about these mounts, and this happened with the Karkadrak as well that I'd previously done, is that there's no real flesh beneath the armor, and I can't keep the armor because these are intended to look like they're organic Kruleboy mounts, not specifically Stormcast mounts that they then layered armor on. This is just some swamp creature, not specifically a Dracoth, or it is a Dracoth, but of the swamps. So most of those I had to cut off, and I would have to cover later. Something else I did is that his reins are hard molded onto the armor around his neck, so I had to snip those off, and I forgot to put it on camera. I always forget that. I green stuffed over the spaces, and as you can see, there were quite a few. I started by fitting on the Killaboss from the Gnashtooth, who actually fit really well right out of the box. At first, I was going to try and put on the same shoulder pauldrons that I had with the Karkadrak. I really liked how those looked and how it broadened his silhouette. My original idea was to cut down the breastplate and try to make it look like it was fitting under the pauldrons, but that was just really fiddly and not working great, and what I ended up deciding to do instead was just to use the breastplate as a whole and snip down the bottom corners so that they wouldn't clip into the upper legs. At this point, I also added in a lot of the same little flourishes I had for my first conversion with the Karkadrak. I added some hanging cloth, I added the Belcher banner to smaller faces, and with those in place, it was time to add a saddle. So for the saddle horn, I used the same little arch I had for the Karkadrak back of the saddle. The head of the Dracoth was looking just a little too heroic, so to swampify him, I decided to give him the mask from the Scumdrek kit. It has a really creepy look to it with its eye hole things, and very Kruleboys. So I just cut down his head and glued it over it. To his shoulders, I glued one pauldron from the Gnashtooth kit, and on the other side, one from a different Killaboss. To cover up the rump of the Dracoth, I smoothed in a lot of Procreate to make it look like it was just cloth draped over it, and over that, I put one half of the neck armor from the Scumdrek kit. This did not work well. It looks kind of just weird and raised, and I thought that I could green stuff the gap between the armor because obviously his haunches are broader than the Swampdrek kit, but to get the lowest profile, I had to reverse how the armor normally works and have the top plates at the back and them decreasing as they went upward, and I just wasn't really here for it. So what I ended up doing is taking it all off and instead putting on two overlapping plates of the shoulders from, I believe, one of the Killaboss kits. The head was looking good after I had put on the helmet, but I kind of thought it would look better if I just actually replaced the entire top jaw portion with that of the Swampdrek. So I took off the helmet I had added, cut down the head, and layered that over. This looked okay, but I'm not sure if the longer jaw actually looks any better than the shorter one. The shorter one looked kind of dog-like, a bit more like the Gnashtooth, which I did like, but either way, it's too much trouble to go back, so I left it in place. I then gave him a head. This is the one actually from one of the Bolt Boys, I believe. Not from a Killaboss, but it gives him a really cool look. I also used a small shield here instead of the big Killaboss one because it doesn't fit. Another interesting thing was that the arm I gave him is not the original Killaboss one. It goes to, I believe, the one from the Vulture. I just like the stance more. It mimics the original Stormcast and just makes him look like he's reined his mount up and is looking out at the battlefield ready to do battle. On the whole, I'm actually super pleased with how this turned out. I wasn't quite sure if it was going to work because originally the stance of the Dracoth is so heroic and very Stormcast-y, but it transferred over really well and I think looks really sinister. The Karkadrak conversion also works really well, and though I of course never paint my models, I think if it was painted like an iguana, that would actually make it really unique and cool looking. Honestly, I didn't love the Kruleboys when they first came out. I thought they were just like a little bit weird looking, but I love converting their beasts over. It's so much fun finding different ways and different armor to use. And I'll definitely be doing more. So if you liked this video, hit the subscribe button and you'll be able to see those when they come out. As always, thanks for watching.